All right, let's dive into one of the wildest, but most important, true stories in legal history. And yeah, it really does start with a bottle of ginger beer and a very, very unlucky snail. But believe me, it ends with a rule that pretty much affects all of us every single day.
I mean, think about it for a second. We've all been there, right? You trip, you drop something, you have one of those clumsy moments that causes a little accident. But what happens when that accident causes real harm? Who's on the hook? Who has to pay? Well, the answer to that question was basically invented because of the bizarre story we're about to get into.
So, to prove someone was legally careless, what the law calls negligent, you gotta check 4 boxes. Think of this as our roadmap for the story. First, did the person even have a responsibility to be careful in the first place? Second, did they drop the ball on that responsibility? Third, did their screw-up actually cause the problem? And finally, was the damage something you could see coming, or was it a complete fluke?
To really get how we ended up with this roadmap, we have to jump in a time machine and go back nearly 100 years to a single moment that honestly changed everything.
Okay, so picture this. It's a quiet afternoon in August 1928. We're in a small cafe in Paisley, Scotland. Just a totally normal day that was about to become anything but.
A woman named May Donahue is hanging out with her friend. Her friend decides to treat her and buys her a ginger beer float. Now, this tiny little detail, the fact that her friend bought the drink and not her, that is the absolute key to this whole story.
And here's the other crucial piece of the puzzle, the bottle itself. It's made of this dark brownish glass, so it's totally opaque. You have no idea what's inside. So the friend pours some of the ginger beer over ice cream for Mrs. Donahue, and she starts drinking it.
And this is the moment. As her friend goes to pour the rest of the ginger beer into the glass, something else sloshes out with it. It's the slimy, decomposed remains of a snail. As you can imagine, Mrs. Donahue was horrified and became seriously ill.
So here's the legal pickle. Mrs. Donahue couldn't sue the cafe owner because she didn't have a contract with him. Her friend bought the drink. And she definitely didn't have a contract with the manufacturer, Mr. Stevenson. So, based on the law at the time, did the manufacturer owe her anything? Was he responsible at all? The answer back then was a big, fat, maybe not.
This totally unique problem forced the highest court in the UK to think way outside the box. They couldn't just use the old rules. They had to invent something new to figure this out.
And this is it. This is the simple, yet totally revolutionary idea that came from the head judge, a guy named Lord Atkin. He basically said, look, we all have a duty to take reasonable care to not hurt our neighbors. Which, of course, brings up a pretty big question.
And here's his brilliant answer. Your neighbor isn't just the person who lives next door. In the eyes of the law, your neighbor is anyone so directly affected by what you do that you should have them in your mind when you're acting. So for a ginger beer maker, that's not just the shop they sell to, it's the person who's actually going to drink the stuff.
So Lord Atkin's idea really boils down to 2 common sense tests. First, foreseeability. Could you reasonably predict that your actions might hurt someone? Yeah, for a drink maker, it's pretty foreseeable that a contaminated bottle could make someone sick. Second, proximity. Is the relationship between you and them close and direct enough? Again, yeah, the link between the guy who makes the drink and the person who drinks it is about as direct as it gets.
Okay, so a duty of care exists. The manufacturer should have had Mrs. Donahue in mind. But that leads to the next big question. How do you know if that duty was actually broken? Like, how careful is reasonably careful?
So the law came up with this brilliant idea, the reasonable person test. It's not about what you would have done or what I would have done. It's about what a hypothetical, ordinary, sensible person would have done in that exact situation. Would a reasonable bottler have a system to make sure snails don't end up in their ginger beer? You bet they would.
Now, courts don't just guess what's reasonable. They do this kind of balancing act, where they weigh these 4 big factors. They look at the magnitude of the risk, how likely is it that someone will get hurt, and how bad could it be? Then they look at how easy or expensive it would have been to prevent it. They even consider if the action had some important social benefit. And finally, what's the standard practice in that industry?
Let's look at a real example of magnitude of risk. A cricket ball got smacked out of a stadium and hit someone. It sounds bad, but the stadium had a 7-foot-high fence, and a ball had only ever cleared it about 6 times in 30 years. The court said the risk of that happening was so incredibly tiny that the club wasn't negligent for not building an even taller fence. The risk was just too remote.
But now, flip that idea on its head. In this case, a mechanic was already blind in one eye.
His boss knew this, but didn't make him wear safety goggles. Sure enough, a small piece of metal flew into his good eye, blinding him completely. Here, the chance of an accident might have been small, but the seriousness of the potential harm, total blindness, was catastrophic. The employer had a much higher duty to be careful, and they failed.
So we've got a duty, and we have a breach of that duty. But that's still not enough. You have to connect the dots. You have to prove that the careless act is what actually caused the harm. This is the chain of causation.
The first and simplest way courts check for this is the but-for test. It's a really straightforward question. But for what the defendant did, would the injury have happened anyway? If Mrs. Donahue would have gotten sick regardless, then the snail isn't the legal cause. But if she would have been perfectly fine but for drinking that contaminated ginger beer, then boom, you've established causation.
But of course, life is rarely that simple. What happens when there are multiple possible culprits? In this really sad case, a premature baby went blind. Now, a hospital mistake with oxygen monitoring was one possible cause, but the poor baby also had 5 other medical conditions that could have caused it. The court said you can't just point fingers and guess. You have to prove that the hospital's mistake was a material cause of the harm, not just one possibility in a sea of others.
Okay, so let's zoom back out and bring it all together. That one snail in that one bottle of ginger beer back in 1928 set off a legal earthquake, and we are still feeling the aftershocks today.
Lord Atkin's neighbor principle is now, quite literally, the foundation of our modern law of negligence. It applies to just about everyone. Drivers on the road, doctors in operating rooms, your boss at work, and yes, manufacturers. This idea has spread all over the world, and it's still evolving. Now, to make sure it doesn't get out of control, courts have added one more check. They ask if creating a duty in a new situation would be fair, just, and reasonable. It's like a final common sense gut check.
And that really leaves us with one final big thought. The snail in the bottle forced the world to ask, who is my neighbor? And in our crazy, hyper-connected world today, that question is more important than ever. Is your neighbor the person who reads your comments online? Is it the environment that's affected by your choices? Is it maybe even the generations who will come after us? The strange story of Mrs. Donahue is a powerful reminder to always think about who our actions might touch.